Single malt whiskey has always confused me, and Nico's going to clear it up on this episode of Texas Whiskey.
It's been a long time on that intro, didn't you?
They're supposed to be short. Welcome once again to Texas Whiskey. My name is Jimmy Hayes Nelson. Most people just call me Coach Jimmy. And as always, to my right is the good doctor, Dr. Nico Martini, the Baron of Booze. What's up, man?
Hey, buddy. What's going on, man?
Hey, it's been a minute. I like your haircut. Looking sassy.
Yeah, you know. Hey, shout out to Kaylee. Hey,
shout out to Kaylee. There's your free plug for his hairstylist.
And you'll know nothing else about
nobody else. There's no number. Kaylee. There's no way to know how you're going to hang out
just
or get your haircut from
Kaylee and like
Kaylee
and
Dallas.
Dude haircuts. Yay.
Hey, so we're talking single malt today, but before then, usually you pour something for us. What would you like to start with today?
Well, you know what? I'm going to give you. Why don't you pick a distillery?
Oh,
since I have all of them in front of me, so you know some distillery. You have gotten to the point in your whiskey knowledge that you are familiar with some distilleries who do single malts.
I am.
What do you want?
You have Andalusia?
I do have Andalusia.
All right. Andalusia for the win.
We are going to go. Whoa, actually, tell you what, I have the new Andalusia bottled and bond,
as opposed to the one that's sitting in front of me.
As opposed to the one that's sitting in front of you.
What's different about this one?
This is the second release of the bottled and bond. That one that is sitting in front of you sold out very, very quickly.
Oh, cool.
This one goes on. I believe this one is. He just did a release. Yeah, he just did a release. Yeah, okay. It was his 5th anniversary, and so Ty did a release of his bottled and bond for his 5th year anniversary. It also came out with another whiskey that we're going to talk about here in a second. But again, to remind the audience, this is the first bottled and bond whiskey in Texas. It is a single malt whiskey.
Would you like to remind our wonderful audience what bottled and bond means?
Bottled and bond means it is a minimum 4-year-old whiskey.
Right.
It has to be all distilled. It has to be distilled and aged in a single location.
Okay.
It has to, and it is released. It has to be a bonded warehouse, which is silly now, because if you are in booze, everything that you do is bonded.
I was like, that sounds like something paperworky.
Well, it was a prohibition era.
Gotcha.
This was a prohibition era reactionary law.
Okay.
So basically, it comes out. It is 100 proof.
100 proof.
So every single bottled and bond
exactly,
you have
or
is
at
100,
least
it is 100 proof.
Got it.
It's 100 proof. So the idea behind bottled and bond was that. It was a way for you to know as a whiskey consumer that the place that you're buying it from, everything happened there. They weren't mixing anything, and there were certain regulations that were met and certain stipulations that were met by the whiskey producer.
Gotcha. And this bottle actually was the first bottled and bond Texas whiskey. Yeah. Across the board, right?
Yeah, okay. Which is crazy because, bottled and bond was made for bourbon.
Sure.
And so,
right. And we're not talking bourbon. Yeah. So the fact that it was a single malt.
Yeah,
so, okay. Awesome.
It's a single malt. So, what do you get on the nose? See, I like quizzing you.
You do, but I feel like it's so funny because I go back to another single malt we've had, the banana whiskey. Mm-hmm. And it smells really similar to me. Like it has that kind of sweet, the banana whiskey.
The banana whiskey.
Which we've referenced as well
before.
We
have referenced this before, but for those who are not familiar with the banana whiskey, which we lovingly call this thing the banana whiskey. This is a Pfluger single malt.
Spirit of Texas, right?
Spirit of Texas. It is in Pflugerville. It comes out at a 92 proof, and it is banana as hell, man. It is
Nico has this wonderful... I was going to say like habit, but I don't know. Just you like to smell desserts in your whiskey.
Dude,
banana bread. This one's a cupcake. This other one's creme brulee.
Well, what you're going to notice when you kind of start doing the tasting note thing is you're going to reference the stuff that you're the most familiar with.
So we also know Nico has a sweet tooth.
I like sweet shit.
Yeah.
So, everything that comes out of my mouth is going to be like, oh, it's creme brulee.
Okay.
It's banana sauce.
Hey, so dessert Nico, what do you smell in that?
This I get a lot of it's kind of like a dark cherry pie, but not like the middle of the cherry pie on the burnt end, not the burnt end, but like the
right by the crust.
Right by the crust.
Got
yes,
it.
Yes, and it's not necessarily the cherries of the cherry pie, but it's the cherries that have now become the filling.
Oh.
Of the cherry pie.
As it's been influenced by the crust that it sits next to.
Exactly.
Now we're getting really specific.
And plums. I get plums too.
That drink's so lovely, though.
Mm-hmm. So
the idea, okay, so
today we're talking single malt whiskey.
We're talking single malt, and in the intro, I said it literally is the whiskey that has confused me the most, because I was like, so we like, it used to be bourbon, like we would talk about bourbon, and you'd be like, oh yeah, single malt, and somewhere in my head I just was thinking, I just put it in like the rye category, and then I was like, no, this is its own, and I don't know why. It's like early on, it was like bourbon rye. That's where I stuck everything. And you always kept referencing single malt. And I'm like, wait, what's the difference? And then right before the show started, I said something about, oh yeah, malt's a different grain. And you lovingly looked at me and said,
Jimmy.
Yes?
Malt is not a grain. Malt is something that you do to grain. Typically, you do to barley.
All right, so let's go through the process of what makes a single malt a single malt.
Well, I'm gonna cut to the chase because basically, like, one of the things.
And you're right. When I said that, I was like, you're right. Like, malt isn't a grain. So is it always barley?
Yes.
Okay.
So when you have a single malt,
right?
I'm going to read you what is the standard of identity from the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission.
Oh.
Tell you a little bit about the commission real quick. So the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission is a group of distillers who have gotten together to influence the TTB who run all of the regulations and stipulations around alcohol to create a category that is officially recognizing American single malt as a standard of identity. Meaning, when we put American single malt on our label, it means this.
Very similar to how we've talked many times about what makes bourbon.
Yes.
It's kind of like that same regulation that you can't use the words now, American single malt, without it
actually meaning what they've said. This is the standard of identity for the words American single malt when it is on a bottle of whiskey.
Cool.
And so as of right now, you can slap those words on any whiskey you want to.
Doesn't matter at all.
No,
it's basically like the word whiskey.
Yes.
It's just generic.
It's generic as hell. Yeah. And so
does it have to have like any barley in it at all to have it on there?
No.
So how old is this this kind of movement to regulate this?
So it is on the docket for this fall.
Oh,
which
really
means if it goes well, and they think that it's going to go well, that it will be officially recognized within the next 2 or 3 months. There will be an official standard of identity for American single malt.
Is single malt like inside the whiskey family? Is it the only one that's not regulated in some way like this? I mean, because rye, we talk about 51% rye, and I feel like bourbon is the most regulated. And correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like the rules for bourbon are the most specific. Mm-hmm. For rye, it's a little more nebulous. And then obviously what you're saying for single malt, it's just the Wild West and whatever you want to do on it. So do you feel like once this comes in, it's going to be as regulated as bourbon?
I mean, the biggest thing that this is going to do is this is consumer driven. Like the entire reason that they're doing this is because you have makers like Balcones,
right,
who are making wonderful American single malt.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to when you go to Bob's Steak and Chop House, which is a big favorite of yours,
I love Bob's,
and you ask for the whiskey list, where is this? It's on the whiskey list.
It's not.
If they're lucky,
right? Well,
if they're lucky, there's a category called Texas. If they're not, now okay. Let's say you're in Chicago. You are at a steakhouse in Chicago, and you are wanting to have yourself a nice Balcones, and you pick up the whiskey list. Is it going to be under Scotch? It's not from Scotland, so it can't be there. Is it going to be under Irish. It's not Irish. It's not going to be there. Okay, is it? It's not going to be bourbon. It's not there. I mean, I guess you should. It could be under American
whiskey.
But if it's a high-end steakhouse, they're going to know the value of bourbon, so they're going to kind of want to separate out the bourbon. So it's just going to be it's going to be under whiskey. But is there a rye category? Like it's you don't know where.
I've
to put
never seen the word single malt on a whiskey list. I mean, unless, it's like at a restaurant whiskey list ever, or half the time when I'm screenshotting you, like, hey, what should I try?
Right.
There's never like a subcategory of single malt.
Right. And so this, what this standard of identity is going to do, it's going to help kind of delineate what this stuff is, and kind of help the consumer like start to be able to categorize this. Because we do make single malt whiskey in America.
Right.
And we make it very differently than Scotland or Ireland or Japan. And we just sort of need a way to call it what it is. And
so is this, again, as we're talking about this process, and you're going to get into that here in just a second, as far as grain-wise, is single malt, are they starting with the same grain that ends up being Scotch? Is it the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. So because
single malt is barley.
Okay, it's barley.
It is made of barley.
And barley, that's all Scotch.
100% barley.
Right.
And so if it is a single malt, it is 100% barley. I actually ended up in a conversation with Davin Topol from Real Spirits. And he was telling me how when they first came in, when he first came into Real Spirits is a subsidiary of Real Ale.
Okay.
So Real Ale is this huge brewery down in Blanco, and they wanted to start distilling their beer.
Right.
And so they brought in Davin because he's a distiller. And the first thing that he did was he looked at their labels and he's like, okay, this is okay. We're distilling you're distilling your beer. Got it. You've already done some runs. You've already got some whiskey in bottles. You've got malt, you've got single malt on your labels. It's not single malt because you've added sugar to this. And so because it's the beer, like all you did was you took the beer,
right,
didn't hop it, and ran it through a still,
right,
which is perfectly fine. It's a whiskey. It's right, not a single malt because you've added some sugar.
Okay.
You have an additive. It is officially not a single malt. And so all single means is 100% malt.
Okay.
And so like one of the first things that he did was like, cool, everything that we do from now on, don't put the sugar in it, and we're just gonna, you don't need it anyway. It's not really gonna translate much anyway. And so pull it out. It needs to be 100% grain so that we can start officially putting single malt on it.
Right.
He was like, I think all those bottles are gone.
And is that easy to explain, like what that process is? How we get from barley to, if malt is something you do to barley, like what's that process before it goes into becoming your mash bill and like the whole process? Like where do you go from grain to malted?
I mean, basically, I don't want to turn this whole thing into
science.
How do you make whiskey? But
right, but I was just, we brought that up, and so
right,
the fact that why isn't it called barley whiskey? You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, the way rye is called rye
because you are malting the barley.
Okay,
and so malting is a process that you basically take the grain and you let it germinate slightly.
Okay,
and so it opens up, and then you stop it from germinating so that it doesn't turn into plants.
Right.
And then that is the grain in which you start distilling.
Okay.
So that is the starting point for all single malts. It is malted barley.
Gotcha.
So the standard of identity, according to the American Whiskey Commission, it is made from 100% malted barley.
Okay.
It is distilled at one distillery. It is mashed, distilled, matured in the United States.
Okay.
It is matured in oak casks, not of a capacity not exceeding 700 liters,
okay,
which is massive.
Those are the big ones.
Those are bigger than you've ever seen.
Okay.
I don't know if I've seen a 700 liter one. I've seen some 600, but man, that's
these can be reused barrels as well.
Yes,
they don't have to be new. Like again, I keep going back to the bourbon rules, right? And so these can be reused barrels.
So matured in oak cask, not exceeding 700 liters, distilled to no more than 160 proof, 80%, and bottled at 80 proof or more.
80 proof or more. Okay.
If you are under those parameters, as soon as this thing becomes law, that is an American single malt.
Gotcha.
Which the reason that it's actually fairly wide open because of the different ways that you go about this stuff. And
because I was just about to ask what makes things, if it's all malted barley, we're not, again, if I'm going to go back to the ryes we've talked about, the bourbons where things are just have to be 51%, right? Corn. And then you get to be really creative with the other 49%. That's not the case here. So what makes the variety of what all is sitting in front of you?
It's kind of the process of what you do after you make the whiskey.
Okay.
And there's a lot of.
You want to point out another one and just use an example?
Sure. Let's go with this one. This is a Mirador.
Okay. Our friends at Balcones.
Our friends at Balcones. This is a Balcones Mirador. This is what you just said. This is second use barrels.
Okay.
So,
does it specifically say what the first use of them were? Like, I guess, could you do,
no,
is it?
It doesn't.
So let me stop you there for just a second.
It's probably bourbon.
Okay.
Because most of what you'll find, the bourbon industry is actually propping up the Scotch industry in a lot of ways, because the majority of the Scotch that you are consuming was aged in second use barrels.
Okay.
There are very few, I don't know, man. I don't know much about Scotch. Like I don't know enough about Scotch to speak at it from a educated standpoint. But the majority of single malts is inherently a second use barrel aging technique. Okay. There's a few of them, and I believe that, I don't know if I have it here, but I believe that the Balcones one is a new barrel, but new barreled oak imparts so much flavor that, and barley is a much lighter grain. It is not as hardy as corn. So,
no, and like literally just drinking this, it's not as robust.
Right.
Okay. Could you use barrels from, so we've talked about finished whiskey before. Could you use, like, let's say a rum barrel to make a single malt, not considered finished, not to finish it, but to actually make does it have to be used as a whiskey barrel beforehand? Does that make sense?
No, I mean, so it's wide open.
So you could take now would that be, would you consider that finished or would you not? Because if it's initially made in, like, let's say a rum barrel.
I mean, if you stick whiskey in a rum barrel and then pull it out 24 months later, it's going to have a very rummy vibe to it. So.
Even though because a lot of times when we talk about finished, it was, aged in one barrel and then finished in another. But in this situation, technically the whole process could have happened in a rum barrel or in a port barrel or in a Madeira. And
they wanted to leave it wide open because of that.
That's cool.
And so,
and obviously, so that does answer my question. You're going to get a wide variety. If the barrel isn't, if it's kind of whatever you want as far as the barrel, as long as it's oak, but what it was used for beforehand, it seems like this is a very varied category.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and a lot of things that one of the things that you'll find in Texas specifically is, man, we love to smoke our malt, I swear. Okay, so this one, this is from Acre Distilling out of Fort Worth. It's their Parker County Parker County smoked single malt.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly how he's doing it, but I know that this is a smoked single malt. That's a smoked single malt. This is a smoked.
And is that basically meaning you're smoking the grain before it goes into the distilling process?
Yeah, you are malting your barley and then you are sticking it in the smoker, and it's what I call barbecue whiskey.
It is.
So we barbecue our whiskey down here a whole bunch.
Is that what is it not brimstone? Is that brimstone? Is that what that is as well?
Brimstone.
It's funny because I almost grabbed that bottle and I was like, I didn't see single malt on it, and so I didn't know if it fit the category.
I don't think that brimstone is a single malt. I think that brimstone is a whiskey, which all that means is that it's probably kind of a bourbon mash bill, but it is finished in. They do I think it's a live oak scrub.
Okay,
a live scrub oaked like cook on the grain before they distill.
Well, pick one of the smoked ones, because let's smell that, because when when we had the brimstone here from Balcones, literally when I stuck my nose in that, it reminded me of like the barbecue Lay's potato chips, like you would go to school with in elementary. And I was like, oh, that's when I ate
Brimstone is really, really intense.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a. Here we go.
Okay.
Let's talk about this.
We're still staying with Andalusia.
We are still staying with Andalusia.
Okay. I don't know this one.
This is brand new.
Okay. That's why I don't know it.
This is the Andalusia Paladuro.
Okay.
Canyon.
No, but Paladuro, yeah.
But it's, it's
right.
named after the canyon. So the Andalusia Paladuro, this is a 100% Texas grown single malt whiskey.
As far as the grain came here,
all of the grain is from Texas. We don't have a ton of those.
Is there not a lot of barley in
Texas? Is not what's interesting. I was in a conversation with this dude Austin from Tex Malt, and he was telling me that there was before Prohibition, there were over I think 600 million acres. Maybe 1,000, maybe 600,000 acres of barley being grown in Texas.
In Texas,
gotcha. Before Prohibition.
Okay.
Prohibition happens, and then what that leads to is the people who were still kind of making the barley for things that were not whiskey necessarily. Everything kind of moved up north, and barley production kind of went back to the Northeast. We stopped doing it here, and we really haven't picked it back up since. Now, because of climate change and because of all sorts of things, it's all kind of moved out west. Pacific Northwest is where the majority of the barley comes from.
The barley comes from. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a ton of it in Washington.
So this is one of the rare ones where the barley is still coming from in-state.
Yes. So this Balcones High Plains is 100% Texas, and this Paladuro from Andalusia is 100% Texas. Now, the reason that you're getting a kind of a smoky vibe on that is that this is 100% Texas barley that has been smoked with peach wood.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
there's a much more robust flavor to this than like what we started with like the bottle and bond and stuff.
It's a more... because the category is a little more wide open, you have whiskey makers who have the ability to just kind of make little changes to impart it. There's subtlety in single malt that you're not going to find in bourbon because it has to be New American Oak. It has to be 51% corn. If it's straight, it has to be 2 years. If it's bonded, there's all these rules.
It also seems like with a lighter grain, like you talked about, it's as opposed to corn has this really like strong, flavorful vibe to it, right? So something lighter like this, I feel like any little thing you're going to do to it is going to show up.
Right.
It's going to be way more apparent the variations within it because it's not like, oh, this is Big Brother corn, like you were dealing with like in bourbon.
Corn is hardy.
Very hard. That's a great way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and barley's not. Barley's really sweet and kind of subtle, and there's a delicacy to it. And
Tyne Andalusia does. I like what they do. It's just so. It's amazing. And for me, someone who, if I look at this growing collection of mine, single malt's not something I have a ton of, but I always keep a bottle or two of Andalusia on hand, and then also that pilgrimage that you have there. I've bought and have not opened yet.
So this is a brand new single malt from Balcones. It is the Pilgrimage. It is a single malt whiskey that is finished in Sauterne casks.
And that's like a dessert wine as well.
Yeah, that's a dessert wine.
Is it like similar to port?
It's sort of in a way. Yeah. It's.
I know we've talked about this. If you haven't, go back and watch the episode about finished whiskey, and we talked about how a lot of times things get finished in some kind of dessert wine, something on the sweeter side, right?
That's a go-to. That's very much a go-to for finishing whiskey.
So going back to the Pilgrimage, this was the whole process was done in the Sauterne
No,
or it was finished?
No, it was finished in Sauternes
Okay.
cask. So I'm assuming that it was aged in bourbon casks.
Okay.
It is at least 48 months in oak, which says to me it was probably sat in the bourbon casks for at least 3.5 years, and then,
Gotcha.
and then they finished it out in the Sauternes.
And I think the thing we come, people maybe if they're popping in the show for the first time, they're like, wow, that sounds like a really young whiskey. And what we've talked about over and over and over again is the climate here really impacts it. So that a 3-year whiskey from here tastes very different and drinks very differently than maybe something if you're used to just drinking something from Kentucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the Paladuro that you're sipping on right there is this is a 3-year whiskey. So
and see, it doesn't taste like this super young whiskey to me.
No, I mean,
at all. You can look at the color, alone. Yeah,
I mean, this does not look like young whiskey.
Out of all of those, and I hate to put you on the spot here, but out of what's all sitting in front of you, do you know which one of those is probably the oldest?
I think it's probably this Pilgrimage, actually. Because if this is or the maybe the Bottled and Bond.
And did you say okay? Wait, and I'm going to go
Bond.
back to this idea of I meant to write it down earlier. It doesn't have to be 4 years old.
What
to be a single malt? Is there an aging minimum at all on that?
No, there's
Okay.
not. No, there's not. Like this right here, this Striker is a 2-year.
I have Striker. In fact, when we went down, we're giving Andalusia a lot of love here, so Ty, you're welcome. But when we went down and visited Andalusia, one of the greatest cocktails I'd ever had is they had like an aged old fashioned with that Striker.
Yeah.
That was, and that one's pretty smoky as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, and again, I'm not.
This is their smoked single malt.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is when this is the epitome of barbecue whiskey. Like
Right.
He's got we
were there. Yeah, we saw the smoker and everything in the back.
Yeah, full on. Like it's Ty is a big fan of barbecuing his whiskey. The other one that I wanted to kind of give some love to is Real Spirits.
Yeah.
The thing that I like about Real Spirits, and this kind of goes back to the finishing conversation. So these are both these. This is batch 6 and batch 5.
Okay.
Of the double barrel.
Okay.
They're working on it right now. They're fixing their website, but you will be able to go to the Real Spirits website and type in the batch, and it'll give you all of the information about each one of them. This one was finished in a Striker barrel. This one was finished in a port barrel from Grape Creek Vineyards, right around the corner from.
I just find that interesting that you had a distillery finish their whiskey in another distillery's whiskey barrel. Like normally it is, we pick a winery or beer, or we've talked honey barrels. It's like, no, we like you guys, and we're going to finish our whiskey in your whiskey barrels. And I don't think does that happen often? It seems like that's.
No, I mean it's foreign to me.
Yeah,
I mean, I've never heard that. Another one
like a collaboration between two distilleries.
Another one that they did was they did a double barrel finish in the Balcones Rumble.
Okay,
which is their oh my gosh, what is that made out of? It's not a whiskey. I need more information on the Rumble. I forget exactly what it's made out of, but it's they collaborate with other distilleries all the time.
Gotcha.
Which is pretty incredible, and it's just kind of a testament to everything that's happening in the state.
So we've talked about Balcones. I was looking here, like obviously this lineage is what we started like episode 1. If you go back and watch episode 1, this lineage is what we started the whole kit and caboodle with. We've given a lot of love to Andalusia, mostly because Andalusia. That's all they do is single malt. They don't have a rye. I knew they didn't do bourbon, but they don't have a rye either. It's like Ty is like Captain Single Malt when it comes to
100%
to Texas.
Malt. Everything that he's making is a 100%.
And I feel like this bottle here has made an appearance before because I always think it's tequila.
Right. Well, it's because there's a sugar skull on it.
Yeah.
This is a smoked single malt from Ranger Creek. And
Ranger Creek, San Antonio,
in San
right?
Antonio,
Yep.
Yeah. So this was made for the 300th anniversary, the San Antonio's tricentennial.
Okay.
They're doing this now. So there's a 301.
Sure.
There will be a 302. This is kind of something that they're moving forward. But they've been. This is a whiskey that is distilled from a I forget who they're working with. They're working with a brewery that does a Dia de Muertos beer every year, and so they distilled the beer and then they finished it in they were in those beer barrels. They finished this.
That's very cool.
So I feel like the one for this year they might be finished in a cider barrel or something like that. But yeah, they do.
And
they
again,
do fun stuff too.
Going back to the idea of with this lighter grain and thinking of cider, I'm like, I'm sure that's really going to show up like in a big way. And I'm a big fan of cider, so that would be like that's a win-win for me. That's awesome.
Yeah, totally. So
any last things anything else you want to highlight? We obviously talked about the banana whiskey, it's really clear. Like I love the clarification of this because for whatever reason, and now I get it. Single malt to me has always been the most confusing, because it's the least regulated. So it can be all these different things. And I would hear the word single malt from you. And I was like, and I kept in my head, again, we talk about all the time that usually I'm the one willing to ask the stupid questions that like nobody else wants to ask about. And this is one that I would still keep my mouth shut. And I'm like, okay, Jimmy, you should know this by now. Nico says single malt all the time. And I would still be way confused about it. Like, wait, what is it? And the idea of like, okay, well, there is no mix mash bill with this. It's 100%, malted barley.
It is 100% malted barley.
And now we know. And now you know.
And there's a lot, dude. The category of American single malt is probably the most exciting whiskey category in the world right now.
And why would you say that?
Because the possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact is we've already proven that the same grain will taste different if you grow it in different places.
Sure.
On top of the fact that you've got all of these different grains that you can like. There's chocolate malts. There's rye malts. There's all sorts of different malts that you can use for this stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you throw on the fact that it doesn't have to be a new American oak barrel. Right. It doesn't, like, you can finish it and it's still the same thing. If you finish a bourbon, it's no longer a bourbon.
Right.
And so people don't finish bourbon because if they do that, then it becomes not bourbon. It becomes a weird whiskey thing and they can't put bourbon on the label.
Right,
so
because the word bourbon sells.
Right, exactly. And so in America, you don't finish your whiskey because if you do, it's not bourbon.
Right.
And, when you are selling whiskey here, you want to be able to call it bourbon.
Yeah.
And so this category is just, it's so cool. It's so exciting. Do you feel like the novice,
and
it's new.
Do you feel like the novice whiskey drinker, which, I can't keep putting myself in this category now that we're like 16 shows into this, but do you feel like this is the category that confuses most people? Like they're like single, that they think like I did.
Probably.
They think whiskey, broad, They know bourbon, and they probably heard rye, but single malt, they get the question mark over their head as well.
Yeah. I mean, bourbon's straightforward. Bourbon's incredibly straightforward. Rye is too. Corn's a little weird because you're kind of like, it's a corn whiskey,
bourbon?
But it's not a bourbon. That's confusing. And it's like, well, if you aged it in a second use barrel, it's not a bourbon.
Right.
And so you can't put bourbon on there.
Or if it's 100% corn, you get 100% corn.
Right.
Whiskey
There's a lot of different caveats to that, and when you're trying to hit these parameters, that's part of the reason why they wanted to keep it as open as it is.
Right.
But at the same time, it gives you parameters to work within. And so American single malt as a category is incredibly fast growing.
Cool.
And it is an incredibly exciting area of the whiskey industry right now.
Nice.
And we got a lot of it in Texas, and you should check it out.
We have a lot of it in Texas, and you should check it out. Hey, thank you for stopping by. You need to follow this guy on Instagram. He's Texas Whiskey Book.
I am.
Shoot him some messages. Like, we want to do a Q&A show, and that's going to be helpful because we need questions from you. So follow him, Texas Whiskey Book, on Instagram. I'm the Coach Jimmy. Thanks for joining us again. Until next time, cheers y'all.